All right, RJ, as we kick off this episode of the Red Glare podcast, I have but one question for you. Are the Avalanche trying to make the bottom of the Stanley Cup square? Because they just seem to keep like dropping it, bashing it into things, all sorts of stuff. They're halfway there now. They've got two straight sides.
You know, it would make sense geometrically. That's the word I was looking for. It's more efficient that way. Man, when you do win the Stanley Cup, it's easy to kind of be a little reckless with it. There are plenty of stories of teams damaging the cup while celebrating it. I can't remember any this early while they're still on the ice. I remember, I think it was Dustin Brown that almost dropped it with LA in 2012. As much as I was rooting for that to happen, I think he caught himself there.
Yeah.
But man, uh, did you see the reaction shot from
Yes.
everyone?
Yes.
It was dropped. Who was it that dropped? Was it Newhook? It was one of the depth guys that was actually carrying the thing and slipped.
Yeah. I think that's it. It was somebody like that. I don't remember exactly who.
But all
Uh,
the faces.
the faces are just—it's so funny. It's I mean it happens, right? Like even if they were to somehow make it completely square on the bottom, it would not be the worst thing to happen to the Stanley Cup over the course of its history.
No, absolutely not.
Think of some of those original teams, like or the original stories way back when about them it being like so dented that the team like before anybody can realize they take it to like an auto body shop to try to get like all the dents worked out and um who was it like way back, like it might have been like the original Ottawa Senators or whoever, who they all got so drunk and they like misplaced it and they couldn't find it and they had left it out on a frozen pond or lake and it
Yeah, the frozen pond.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Just so good. So
That's the
many
one
so
thing
many
you
fun
can't do is
stories.
lose it entirely.
Yeah, well, the NHL and the Hockey Hall of Fame now make sure that that's not going to happen. You've got one of two guys with the exact same haircut that are going to be following it around anywhere it goes.
Yep.
I love
Oh
that
yeah.
that's
Shout out
like,
to Philip Pritchard,
I know,
keeper of the cup.
I just love that that's now like a requisite to, having that job is you got to have that haircut specifically.
Yeah, I wonder when that came into being. I don't know.
When it,
Maybe there's something again. Maybe there's something geometrically that makes it work.
maybe it's a certain
Maybe a
aerodynamics when
square cup
holding it.
would throw that off. Maybe they needed some kind of square haircut.
Exactly. But that is, we are talking about that because the Avalanche did win the cup. The series is over. Avalanche getting it done in six. Yeah, there was some tension throughout, a couple overtime games, all that kind of stuff. But Colorado just continued what they were doing really this whole postseason run, which is, hey, we don't have to worry about facing too much adversity or playing from behind if we just don't ever let ourselves get there. And
Exactly.
yeah, all credit to them. They did a fantastic job this whole postseason. They got it done. Very nice combination of speed and size and skill, all that kind of stuff. Like they just looked like the better team. Really, at the end of the day, like Tampa would get up for like a couple periods, but they just could never seemingly hang with them for a full 60 and certainly the 60 plus.
Exactly. I mean, the Avs just so dominant. Every single game, it seemed like they just kind of had their foot on the gas, and Tampa, all they could do was just try and survive, which is what we saw really in just about every series for Colorado. They always looked like easily the better team, and against that Tampa Bay Lightning team, that's no easy feat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, all credit to the Avs, and I think now is a good time to say that yes, I was wrong. I was absolutely wrong about this Colorado Avalanche team. Paper Tigers, they are not.
Yeah.
They are, a dominant hockey team. Absolutely deserve the Stanley Cup. Left no doubt that they were the best team throughout the playoffs. Yeah, I was wrong, but I am not sorry. I will say that I am not sorry because as some of our followers have theorized, I may have just doubted their way into a Stanley Cup, and I'm okay with that. I'm happy the Avs won the cup. They're a very likable team. I have no problem with them winning the cup. Yeah, it sucks being wrong all throughout the playoffs like
Yes.
that. But I really have no problem with it. Same as I have no problem being wrong about saying that Vegas was going to win the cup all season.
Yes.
So
Thank
I'm wrong, but I'm happy about
I
it.
was gonna say, thankfully you didn't speak that one into existence. Yeah, I mean, I've been wrong. I've been kind of drip feeding my wrongness, like admitting I was wrong about certain aspects throughout the postseason run. I talked about Bednar certainly heading into this Stanley Cup final and all the adjustments he had made through the postseason, kind of showing that no, you know what, he does deserve to hang here, and I do think he has what it takes to coach a team to a Stanley Cup. Talking about some of the other young guys in the group, talking about how, hey, I just think teams can only win a Stanley Cup after their supposed window is over and the media starts writing them off. Like, I really think at some point that's just what it is. You need to really lose in like 4 or 5 different ways and go through that before you can kind of come together and be a winning group. And I gave all my history for that, and certainly Colorado followed through with that example. Talked about picking, Edmonton and Tampa kind of just because, like, but almost tongue in cheek, like against the Avs to try to make it happen. So I was there with you, just spreading it out. I didn't want to quadruple down. That was really the difference between us. I spread out the apology tour a little bit more. Yeah, this team was just so dominant, and as you talked about, being happy for these guys, you could tell, like, when Landeskog takes that cut for the first time, and you realize, oh yeah, no, he has been there for like 11 years now. Like, it has
Hmm.
not been a short amount of time, and he's been their captain for a decade, and how much that means to him and all the things he's gone through in his journey, and then to immediately hand that off to an Eric Johnson, right? And you're just like, oh my gosh, I am so happy for that guy who has gone through so much in the course of his, very, very long career at this point. See guys like Cogliano get it, both Eric Johnson and Cogliano, I think, joining a select few players to get their first Stanley Cup 1,000+ games into their career. That's a really fun, interesting thing. All sorts of other people, like, yes, it's cool. Nathan McKinnon now has one to take, and he can compare with Crosby or whatever there. Talk about Rantanen. He's a player who deserves to win this. Nazem Kadri, again, big story. Him finally getting a Stanley Cup, all that stuff. Even Jack Johnson, right? Just everything he's had to go
Hmm.
through, dealing with his parents, all that kind of stuff, getting that Stanley Cup. So there was basically no bad stories to come from this group winning a Stanley Cup at all. Just good ones, and you could just see it on their faces. I mean, every year you see the excitement and stuff, but comparing it to last year when a team won it for a second year in a row, there is a difference when it's a group of players that has largely never won before, and they've had to face a lot of adversity getting there.
For sure. And going back through that list of names, Jack Johnson for me, I think was the best, receiving the cup reaction.
Yeah.
There, just a great photo. He's like,
Yes.
yes, let's go.
Yes.
He was so happy. Eric Johnson, he for me embodied most kind of the journey that this Avs team has gone through, and it really, where it kind of really sank in for me. With that journey from last to first, really, was seeing, I think it was the 5 players who were still around from that 48-point Avs team. And yes,
Yeah.
that's 48 points in a full 82 game season.
Yeah.
That's one of the worst teams, in my
Yeah.
memory.
20, 20.
Maybe.
Yeah, 21 points below the next lowest team. Like
Yep.
super bad.
That was a bad team, and I remember I got to see them play once that season. I went to a Sharks game where they played against that Avs team. Man, they had nobody.
Yeah.
They had nobody. I mean, some of those guys again that were still around turned out to be Cup champions, but it just, depth wise, that team was just not good at all. So to see guys who were on that team and took that journey from there to winning the Stanley Cup with this team that was so dominant too. I mean, they've really seen both ends of it with the same franchise. That's just really cool. And the guys who've made that journey together too, like that shot that they cut to of McKinnon and Eric Johnson just hugging each other on the ice, just the two of them,
Yeah.
seeing kind of what they had been through together, right? That was just awesome to see. So, yeah, great feel good story for this team.
Yeah, and I got to think that it was a big. Well, I touched on it earlier, Jared Bednar, but becoming. Didn't they say he was the first coach now to have won
Yep.
ECHL, AHL, and NHL championships along the way? What an accomplishment that is! And how happy I am for him to be the first guy to do that. He certainly deserved it. And talk about, it's got to be a sigh of relief for Joe Sakic and all those people in that front office. And we talk about a lot of times, right? The players go into front office roles, and sometimes they stick with the team that they were famous for playing for. Sometimes it's a different team. Talk about just the Lightning, right? Yzerman really helped build this Lightning group, or at least the core aspects of it, before he went back to Detroit to try to do it there with the team that, of course, he played for forever and won a lot with. I got to think that at some point, if you're a Joe Sakic, that you're like, okay, I brought all this glory to this team as a player, all that stuff. I'm coming into the front office. I believe in what I'm doing, but it is not working. And the added pressures of feeling like, hey, maybe I'm not the person to do this for this team that you've built your entire life around of. Most of your adult life has been around this team, almost all of it, right? And to be I'm sure at some point there were some doubts and questions about it. Privately, they never admit that stuff publicly, but where you think like, hey, maybe I'm not the person to do this, right? And
Right.
and to finally kind of have it, you know, pay off for you and the moves you've been making and all that stuff, to pay off for that fan base that is very near and dear to you and all that stuff. I think that's also special.
And Sakic's kind of gone through that journey with this team, like I
Yes.
mentioned with the players too. He's had to have a lot of learning experiences, as a GM. I mean, it's a very tough job. You've
Mm-hmm.
got to figure things out, and he kind of learned and grew with the team. And it's tough when you're basically a legend in your own right as a player for that same franchise. All of a sudden, now you're messing with your legacy.
Mm-hmm.
If you things don't work out, this is how fans remember you, and that there's a lot of pressure in that situation. And I think Sakic handled it about as well as you possibly can, and I think he deserves a ton of credit
Yes.
for this team, especially how dominant they were. I mean, that's a matter of construction,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily coaching. And credit to Jared Bednar, like he made adjustments I didn't think that he was capable of making all throughout this playoff run. Did a fantastic job of coaching, but fact is, most teams do not, go through the playoffs with only 4 losses like the Avs had, and a
Yeah.
couple sweeps. You need to be built so solidly just to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Most teams just are not in a situation where they can just not really trail in a series or never face an elimination game. You have to be built that way by the GM. Coaching alone cannot do that. And so credit to Joe Sakic, because this Avs team just so stacked from top to bottom.
Yeah, and so let's go ahead and kind of dive into that, because one of the things that you notice if you pull up like the cap friendly page for this team was, oh my gosh, they had to win it this year, because all the amazing depth that they had, right? The fact that they needed two goalies to get up here. That's another thing to talk about, and that the goaltender who played throughout that Stanley Cup final was a move that Sakic made this past offseason. The decision, let Guru walk, trade a first to bring in a rental, Darcy Kemper, worked out great for you. But looking at this team, RJ, they have what, like 6 forwards that are going to be coming back that just played on the Stanley Cup winning team. Now, that's before they re-sign guys. They have a couple RFAs that they can work with. But just the fact that you only have 6 forwards from this group coming back, that you got half your forwards coming back. You talk about guys like a Valerie Nichushkin, who was huge through the Stanley Cup final, making his presence felt, scoring big-time goals for you. Andre Burakovsky, Laakkonen, RFA, saw how important he was in that game 6. Lots of stuff. Nazem Kadri, of course, adding that center depth that they desperately, don't want to say needed, but used to great effect. All that kind of stuff. Darren Helm, who was big for them through some things. So they have some work to do, and not to mention Nathan McKinnon, JT Compher, UFAs after this next upcoming off season as well. So you got to try to factor that in. So just looking at this forwards group, RJ, like, yes, it helps. You've got Rantanen and Landeskog locked up long term at reasonable deals. I think very fair contracts for both parties involved. But I mean, how do you attack this if you're Sakic?
It's a tough problem because he's going to basically have to rebuild his depth entirely. Kadri, you're not going to be able to afford to keep him. I don't think Burakovsky or Nichushkin you're going to be able to afford to keep. I mean, it's one of those tough things when you have UFAs after a cup year. They're going to go
Yes.
get paid probably. When you actually win that cup, it's much tougher to take a discount to stay with the same team. If they had lost in the final or something, you figure, okay, maybe I'll take a little less. Let's give it another run. We got something special here. But now I think it's probably the time for those guys to go and get paid. As for how to approach it, I think they need look no further than the guys on the other end of the ice, the Tampa Bay Lightning. They have kind of had to rebuild their depth over the last couple years, winning Stanley Cups. That's kind of the blueprint, I think, to do it. And I think they're going to be able to because with how good of a team they have, I think you're going to have some veterans who maybe want to sign up on some lower cost deals and see, okay, can I join this team for a good depth run? Insert Corey Perry joke here.
Yes, I know.
But that type of player, I think they're in a good spot to be able to attract. And then maybe you're going to have to use some assets. You kind of gave up just about everything, with the deadline acquisitions this year. But I don't know, maybe there's something you can do to bring in some lower cost guys, the Brandon Hagel, Goodrow, Coleman type acquisitions that the Lightning made. But I think they're probably going to have to go the veteran route just because they don't have the assets to trade there. Yeah, but it just kind of depends what veteran players, what free agents are going to want to come to Colorado and try and rebuild that depth.
Yeah, I mean, I just talked about the Darcy Kemper trade. You don't have you don't have your first this year because of that trade. Yeah, it's gonna be interesting. You don't have seconds for the next 3 years either, so you don't have
That's
those to
rough.
work with. That's the one that's gonna be really rough to work around. The big thing for me is you need to find who's going to be your second line center. I think that's the big thing that they have to address first. I think it's easier to kind of find 20-ish goal scoring wingers when you factor in the fact that they're going to always have premium matchups because they're not going to have to deal. Other teams are going to be focused on the McKinnons, Landeskog's, Rantanens of the world. I think you can find the winger depth. It's going to be that you need a second top six center. You need somebody who, if McKinnon has to miss a couple games or whatever, can fill in on that top spot, and maybe Rantanen is the guy to do that. After him filling in at center a little bit for Kadri when he was missing time. But I look at the free agent market and I wonder, is this the perfect spot for Vincent Trocheck to come in and be the
Ooh.
second line center for the Colorado Avalanche? Like, yes, he deserves to be paid. He's going to get an increase on his 4.75 number, but he also, not a ton of playoff success in Carolina and stuff. His numbers are very respectable and great, but they're not otherworldly. I look and I go, you know what? Maybe that's a guy that would want to go there, be that second line C, and certainly could, I think, replace a lot of what they're losing in Kadri.
Yeah, that seems like a pretty good fit there. On paper with Trocheck coming in, it's tough because he's gonna have the opportunity to really get paid at 28 as a free agent.
Yeah.
Having that chance, you could get a much bigger contract somewhere else. It would have to be something where the money would work for Colorado. I'm trying to think, maybe a 2-year deal, something, a 3-year deal where you can kind of parlay it into maybe a bigger payday. It's very risky. From a money sense, it's very risky. It just kind of depends on what he wants. It's tough when players like this, you're at a crossroads, right?
Yeah, it's
you know,
it's it is tough. It's just my only question is like he's someone we don't really hear about. Like he's not. I don't know that he's going to have a massive offer in free agency.
right. Yeah, we don't hear a lot about him actually, and I've been surprised about that because he's someone you identified very early on. I mean, we of course we cover the Kraken. We're looking at potential fits for the Kraken, and as soon as you brought him up, I thought, oh, that's a good one. That could be a really good fit to slot in up the middle. But I don't really hear his name out there with other teams. I think he kind of gets overshadowed by the top of this class, by the three Colorado guys specifically. Kadri,
Yes.
Shushkin and Burakovsky, those forwards, but particularly Kadri. I think it's going to be one of those where Kadri's going to sign somewhere, and then teams going to be looking at, okay, well, who's next out there? That maybe if you're the Avs, you make a proactive offer, and kind of before the rest of the market moves on to guys like Trocheck, and you might have a chance.
Yeah, I just because I think a lot of teams, they look at things like production. You had the 21 goals, that's right there with like a Burakovsky, but only 51 points. 10 points less than Burakovsky. Freaking what, 36 less than Kadri? You know what I mean? Like teams are going to be going crazy over that kind of stuff, and Trocheck, he's always kind of been in this thing where he's like a super solid contributor, but maybe point production isn't always there for him, so he gets overlooked. And I can see that happening in free agency, and yes, especially as you talked about, just the fact most teams are going to be wrapped up in trying to get those giant names. Sometimes guys like him can fall by the wayside in those first couple days of negotiation. I just think if I'm Colorado, I make a run at him. I offer him, what, 6.5. He could probably work around that number if you're Colorado, and try to lock him up in that spot, because I think he would have a massive point production increase being in the Colorado
sure.
system, leaving Carolina. You know what I mean? Like I think a lot could happen there. The other name that I thought of is, hey, if Claude Giroux doesn't want to go back to the Flyers, that's when you
Yep.
sign him to like a 2-year deal.
Yeah, the Avs were rumored to be in on him for
Yep.
a while, around the deadline and everything. And I think it came down probably to the Flyers wanting to send him to his preferred destination. I think he made it, clear that Florida is kind of where he wanted to go.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the Avs probably would have been in on that otherwise. So maybe after the failures in Florida, he might want to, I don't know, go somewhere with more of a proven record of being able to win a cup. So yeah, it could be a good fit for Giroux if that's what he wants. I think that would make a lot of sense for him.
Mm-hmm.
If he's trying to chase a cup, that could be another good one. But they're going to have to think creatively, come up with solutions like this. I think they're fine on D. You just sign a depth guy or whatever, and you should be good.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
you're talking about replacing Ryan Murray, Jack Johnson, a very aged Jack Johnson, and Josh Manson, who somehow contributed offensively for you in the postseason while being disastrously defensively. We could go back and forth all day, me and
Yeah,
some
I just
people.
wanted to bring up Josh Manson there so you'd say something about
I
him.
know.
No, I agree with you. But good for him, Stanley Cup champion.
Yeah. No, he got it done. And again, it's just
Yep.
weird. I was such a fan of his years ago in Anaheim. He has fallen off a cliff. I know he scored goals, but he's not going to do that consistently, guys. I promise you.
No, no, definitely not. And then one thing we've kind of just even glossed over, but like in goal, I think they'll be
Yes.
fine. Just sign whatever low cost guy wants to come in and look really good. And I think it's worth mentioning too. It shows how impressive, how dominant the Avs were that you look at Kemper's numbers in the playoffs. And I've been waiting for an excuse to bring this up.
Hmm.
30th out of 31 goalies in the playoffs this year in goals saved above expected.
Hmm.
That kind of goalie performance does not win Stanley Cups.
No.
Unless the team in front of him is really, really good. I believe he's the only goalie with a negative goals saved above expected since they started tracking the stat to win a Stanley Cup. So good on the Avs. But of course, Francouz will stay. That
Yes.
should help.
Yeah, under contract. Yeah, I mean, we could talk maybe the injury affected some of those numbers for Kemper, but yeah, at the end of the day, 902 save percentage. Probably not winning
Yeah.
you the Stanley Cup very often when that's your save percentage. So yes, I don't. Do you think Colorado though, like they pull out the checkbook for him just because he was the guy standing in net when they won? Like we've seen teams do that before.
We have. I actually think Colorado's smarter than that because they
Okay.
shouldn't. But I think, yeah, I don't think they will, just because he doesn't have the history with the team too. When we've seen teams do that, like a Corey Crawford or whatever, it's usually guys who've kind of been in the system for a bit. Binnington, even, he was in the blue system for a
Yeah,
while. I think, Matt Murray,
hmm,
the Penguins. Yeah, well, they didn't have to
they
pay him that
didn't. They
much, did
didn't.
they?
Yeah.
Because they had the RFA rights and everything. But no, I don't think we'll see the same story. I think Kemper will go get paid somewhere else.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. It'll be interesting to see who they bring in. I mean, maybe if he's willing to take a big discount to stay, but if you're him, you're 32. This is your last chance to go get paid somewhere. I think you got to take that and you leverage the Stanley Cup for all that it's worth. If you're him,
Absolutely.
you get on the phone with Edmonton Stat and you try to soak up whatever
Yep.
cap space they're gonna have.
Yep. Just be like, look, you'll sign a 4 or 5 year deal. It'll get bought out in 2. You'll be fine. You don't have
Yeah,
to stay there that long.
yeah.
It'll be good.
So yeah, it's going to be an interesting offseason for the Avalanche. Zach has got some work to do. There's no doubts about that. But in the meantime, I mean, just enjoy it, well earned, and happy for all of them involved. All right.
Yep, for sure.
So looking at the team that they beat, Tampa Bay Lightning. I mean, it's kind of crazy, but like I feel like Tampa Bay is in a better spot than the Avalanche to be back in this situation next year, just because that for the most part everybody's locked up under contract. You look at just everything really all the way top down, right? You don't got to worry about goaltending. You don't got to worry about any of your top guys. Really, the two pieces are going to be Andre Palat, who's going to go somewhere and get paid, and Nick Paul, which is going to be a really interesting situation. We saw how much he meant to this Tampa team this postseason.
Easily one of their most valuable players throughout that playoff run. I just slotted in as this 3C and played kind of a different style than we're used to seeing. We've talked about this in the past, from that Lightning's third line, but he really made it all happen. There's going to be a ton of demand for him as a free agent. I got to think he's one of those guys that will probably take the opportunity to go get paid.
Yeah.
Palat, I feel like they might just find some creative way to keep him around.
I could totally see that happening. I could see him just wanting to stay with this group. It's it'll be interesting. I'm trying to think, like, they don't really have anybody that's going to be bought out. Like there's no money coming off, right? Like because like off the
Right.
books, that's part of it.
What I would try and do is trade away Killorn in order to try and keep Palat.
Yes.
That's kind of the move that I would try to make. Alex Killorn, I didn't see if he was dealing with an injury or anything. Have you heard about that at all?
I don't remember seeing his name on that Tampa
On
injury
that,
list. We're gonna talk about that for sure, all the Tampa injuries, but I don't remember
yes.
seeing it.
You look at his playoff production, and I think in a lot of games watching, he just was kind of invisible to me. I mean, through 23 playoff games, he had just 4 assists, no goals, 4 assists, which is obviously not the kind of performance. He was near a point per game last year in the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now, of course, to me, that usually means, okay, there's some big injury he's dealing with, but I didn't see anything.
Yeah, no, I don't see anything. Googling it.
So, you always want to leave that possibility open. Some guys don't like to talk about it or have the injuries shared. That's a common thing, but we're forced to just go off of what we see then.
Yeah.
And it looks like there's some real decline there.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can try and get out from that contract, it's only 1 year left on it, so there might be teams interested. That's what I would try and do, because Palat was still a very, very valuable player for them.
Yeah, I mean, he scores big time goals. He's shown up. I mean, we talked about this back pre-expansion draft when we were looking at Tampa and stuff. If you go back and look at our really early stuff, and it was Killorn was kind of always the guy that I signaled out. Like if I'm Tampa, he's the one I want to lose. I want to keep Gord. I want to keep Palat. And I was thinking, well, maybe the injury from last year's Stanley Cup final and the rod he had inserted in his leg so that he could come back and play with the broken fibula and everything, maybe that carried over. But he had a really good regular season, 25 goals. I mean, that's a lot for him. He's only been a 20 goal scorer twice before. That's his second time being a 20 goal scorer. So
Right.
he was fine through the regular season. It's just, the postseason came around and he just wasn't there for whatever reason. And it was obvious. But I also think that there was stuff like, it just felt like time finally caught up to guys like Kucherov. Like I always was just waiting on Kucherov to just be that guy who's going to take this thing over, take a game over, take a play over, take a power play over. And he never really was. I know he was dealing with an injury. Like I said, we'll talk about that in a sec. Stamkos, like at some point, okay, yes, you struggled on the power play because you're force feeding Steven Stamkos. I had the same complaint with McKinnon on the other side. At what point are power plays going to realize, that only works for Ovechkin, and that's literally the only guy. Just stop it. Like, but there was plenty of times through multiple different playoff series where I felt like the Lightning were let down by their special teams, and it was just because they were being lazy with how they were thinking about it.
Exactly. You have enough talent there. You should have other options. And as much as Kucherov seemed off, he was still able to, at least early in the playoffs, produce on the power play
Hmm.
and be somewhat of a threat. And you saw the kind of back and forth of that in the Toronto series
Yeah,
where they didn't have to respect him and the Toronto PK was great. And then, oh, all of a sudden you do. And they didn't have answers for it.
yeah,
But yeah, when you become too one-dimensional, it gets stale, especially in a playoff series where teams have the time to prepare. But I do want to say about Stamkos, he left it all on the ice, man.
yeah,
The effort, the gutsy effort in that series from
for sure.
Stamkos. Good to see that. But yeah, the power play was a big issue for them, and yeah, I think it just goes to Kucherov more than anything.
Yeah, and part of it was I just felt like there was little things like Kucherov was playing too high on the circle he was playing off of. Like he'd take shots, but
Hmm.
by the time a puck gets to him and the shot's leaving his stick, there was plenty of time to get in the shooting lane. You know what I mean? Like
Yep.
it just felt like I said, it felt kind of lazy, the Tampa power play. Even like Hedman working the back end, like it just I don't know. There was never a sense of urgency and stuff. I think that's something that they'll address. They're in a good spot to do that. I trust John Cooper completely to work on stuff like that. Um, One last thing before we get to the injuries, RJ. We now definitively have our answer. The curse of Corey Perry is stronger than the good luck charm of Pat Maroon.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear the evidence. Yeah, Corey Perry remains cursed. This is 3 years in a row with three different teams
Yep.
that he has lost in the Stanley Cup final. Not even Marian Hossa could match that.
Nope.
Corey Perry stands alone among hockey players.
Yeah, and I know that there's not too many people out there shedding a tear for Corey Perry in this or
Mhm.
whatever, but I do think that it's something worth, noting, and especially because I mean, talk about making a presence felt, right? Like he finds ways every year of doing this, and really all three of these postseason runs he's been on now, he's been a really solid contributor. Not just doing the Corey Perry things, that aggravate guys, get under goaltender skins, all that kind of stuff, but like it's consistent production. 11 points this year, 6 goals. Like you take that from a bottom six guy.
For sure, he's been so valuable in this kind of new role that he's found himself in for three different teams. Any team can use what Corey Perry
Yeah.
brings for sure in the playoffs. But yeah, I think the curse remains real.
Yep.
We don't know who placed the curse on him, but I bet it was a goalie,
It was probably if it is a
probably a
curse,
group
it's a
of
goalie.
goalies.
Otherwise, I'm sure a lot of people are just saying it's karma,
Yeah,
which is a
maybe that's
distinct
enough.
possibility, maybe. But yes, Pat Maroon playoff, Stanley Cup streak ended, playoff wins, series win streak ended. Uh, Rough to see that, but I look forward to seeing the Beard again next year. And like we were talking about Tampa, they're gonna have another deep run next year. There's just no way they don't.
Yeah, if they hang on to Perry, they're going to lose in the finals. So
Yeah, well, that would be an interesting one. Maybe they'll hold on to him, just trade him at the deadline or something.
there you go. Trade him to a Western Conference team, a Western Conference contender at the deadline.
Yes, exactly. So I'm trying to pull up here the Tampa Bay Lightning injury report because that released yesterday, and there was some significant injuries on there. Every year we hear this stuff. All the injuries guys were playing through the playoffs or through the postseason. We even touched on this a little bit earlier in the postseason talking about it, but decent list, some big names on there. I mean, Corey Perry was on there with an AC joint sprain, Nick Paul AC joint sprain, an MCL sprain. Hagel fractured his foot in the Florida series. Kucherov was playing with a meniscus injury. Ryan McDonough, this one was my favorite. This is the just how they listed it. Mangled finger.
Oh, God.
What is like what does that mean? The mangled aspect tells me that there was tissue damage. Like you would just say a broken
Right.
finger if there wasn't. So I don't know what that entirely means. The Braden Point one, which was obvious, just significant tear in his quad in the Toronto series. Like, yeah, no duh. Like that looked
Yep.
unbelievably painful. And then Belmar played through a meniscus injury, and then Sorelli AC joint sprain in the New York series and dislocated shoulder in the finals, may require surgery. That's the one I called on Discord. Someone came out
Right.
yesterday after this and said, "Hey, looks like you were right." Yeah, it's an unfortunate takes one to know one separated shoulder thing. But that's anytime you see guys hold their arms like that, it's a shoulder injury, and usually it's a separation or a dislocation. So, but it begs the question, RJ, that we kind of have all the time of, is it worth it? Should guys be doing this? Should the NHL and should the NHLPA be taking steps to maybe intervene in some of the situations where we saw Braden Point? You have a tear in your quad. You should not be ice skating. You know what I mean? Like, you should
No.
not be pushing it and trying to come back. I mentioned Killorn. He was trying to come back for the finals. He broke his leg, I think, in the first round of the playoffs, and he was or late in the season, and he was trying to come back for the finals to the point where he had a completely different procedure and treatment course so that he could have a metal rod inserted into his fibula so that he could come back and be able to play in the Stanley Cup final. That would not have been the normal course of treatment for his leg break if he was not trying to get there as soon as possible and to be able to, participate. I guess just, yeah, first off, do you think that the league should continue to allow some of these things happen, given that we know and we're seeing even from very recent players the effects of these postseason runs of playing through these injuries and it cutting careers short? Guys like Ryan Kessler and stuff, like, this stuff adds up. Nicholas Backstrom now potentially career over, and you got to think that playing through instances like this are what contribute to those careers coming up short.
It's tough because I don't know how much the league can necessarily do. I think ultimately it's a culture thing. Where and this is interesting timing too, because I don't know, did you see the Chris Pronger tweet thread that he put out today?
No, I did not.
Okay, I mean, he was kind of talking about, that players play through a lot of this. I think he posted a thing, the price of greatness is sacrifice picture, and talked about, how players take things and that, yes, it can be harmful, but ultimately it's their choice, and that he felt, at least in his case, that it's worth it. But it's so tough when it's so ingrained in the culture. Is it really that player's choice at that point? There's so much pressure on these guys, to do things like this in the moment of the playoffs. And I think it's probably too much, as far as the pressure, just from everyone, from the whole hockey world. I think it's not something that you can have a solution to that's top down, from the league. I don't, like mandating guys, can't play or whatever. I think it's something kind of from the bottom up where the culture has to change a bit, because you look at the long-term harm that it does to some of these players. And, often it's after the playing career that this stuff really comes out, where people need to talk about it more, I think, because you look at, I mean, when you're having, like, Killorn, an entirely different type of treatment. It's one thing if you've got, an injury where it's just, okay, you can delay whatever, surgery or whatever, and you can, it's just pain tolerance, and you're not going to make it worse. Pain management, that's one thing. But I think it frequently goes beyond that. And that's what I really don't like to see.
Yeah, and the things that I hate also, like Matt Dumba playing with a punctured lung. Like, at some point, I feel like, yes, I agree. There's no real way of the NHL or the PA coming in and kind of being the judge of this stuff and determining who plays. But I feel like at some point, the doctors should probably. Like, if the doctors feel like, hey, something like a punctured lung, like, you know what, you probably shouldn't play, because that's super significant, and you have all sorts of, issues of potentially, okay, it could become a bigger puncture. You have issues of other fluids from your body, mainly blood, entering your lungs potentially because of it. Like, there's super significant things there. Like, maybe this is also just a culture thing, but at some point maybe the team doctors kind of get a little more, I don't know, aggressive about holding guys out, or determining like, hey, no, I have to look after your body. That is my job. That's the oath I swore, kind of thing, right? Where it's, I'm not going to let you as a human being destroy yourself beyond this point, right? And maybe that's something that can be talked about. But yes, I think it's a culture thing. I do think that the culture will change at some point. I think the fact that we're seeing more of these careers, like I said, end earlier. It's not just the fact that we're seeing guys in retirement deal with things. Like I think a lot of guys are okay with signing up for that. Yeah, you know what? In my 60s, I'm going to need my knees replaced and all this kind of stuff, or even in my 50s, I'll need my knees replaced, whatever, I can handle that. But when we're seeing guys push through injuries, postseason after postseason, and then all of a sudden, no, I have to retire at 34 when otherwise I would have a lot of playing left. Those are the ones that I think are going to start taking a toll. But it is going to take a brave player being the first guy to do it and to say, hey, no, you know what? I don't think I'm going to be effective, and I don't want to put my body through that. And I would rather, have a postseason run on the back end of my career by making that decision than this current one right now. And I know that that's extremely hard, but I think it's going to take one player doing that first to set that precedent, and then others would follow. I just don't think anybody wants to be the first guy to do it. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
often is the case in a lot of things. But yeah, it's just tough because it you can't help but feel a little bit guilty on our end, right? Whether it's media or
Sure.
fan, that these guys are doing that to themselves and gonna suffer severe consequences for the rest of their lives in some cases for doing it for our entertainment, right? Like we're paying to watch that happen to people. Like that there is an element of that is inescapable. um I know for a lot of people that it's not as big a deal, but it's certainly something I think about as certainly working more in the media space as you spend more time with the players and stuff. It's hard not to, then see them that much more as people and less as the entertainment product before you. So it is just going to be an interesting one. But yes, I mean, for now, it is just one of those things of, yes, it's player choice. I think at some point when it's, we're prescribing or they're being freely given, they're not even really being prescribed. They're just being handed, bottles of very, very significant drugs, and they're getting very regular injections of controlled substances and stuff like that, and that stuff is just flowing freely through locker rooms come postseason times for really all of the teams. That's where I think you could start talking about, you could cut down on some of that stuff. That's they don't necessarily know what they're taking or what the long-term effects of a lot of that stuff are. I mean, they're a player. That's where, again, it's a doctor's responsibility, and maybe, we start focusing on team doctors kind of taking a larger role in all of this, because I think that's the stuff that can become an issue in long term, and could become eventually a legal one if something
Right.
was to happen.
Right, because it's your responsibility to make sure that the player makes an informed choice about what they're doing,
Right.
and and also I think there's another level of responsibility you have to kind of push back almost, because I think a lot of players, in the heat of that moment, the only question you can ask is, how can I get back on the ice?
Mm-hmm.
When can I get back now? How can we make it happen?
Yeah.
And that's an understandable reaction to have when you're in the middle of this playoff run and you just want to get back out there and help your teammates. But I think it's really important upon the people who do know better and who have a better idea of what the long-term consequences are, to really make that clear to the player before just kind of going ahead with whatever they're going to do. And I think that's probably something that isn't done as well as it could be, in the league. And we see that also too with not just in the NHL, but I think in the NFL, particularly with
Yeah.
concussion spotters and that sort of thing, where there's a lot of pressure from the teams, from the players, just, okay, get this guy back out there, get this guy
Yep.
back out there. I always think, especially if a quarterback gets hit in the head or something, and
Mm.
how they're amazingly always able to come back within a few
Yeah.
plays when the game is close.
Yeah.
There's still that pressure there, and that's the kind of thing that needs to change.
Yeah, and I'll end just on this one story, kind of touching on the culture aspect. I've been listening to the audiobook of the Russian Five, which is the story of the Detroit Red Wings putting together the first the five players coming over from the Soviet Union, and it's a really good book. I was going to talk about this over the off season, like kind of do like a hockey book review thing, just as some filler content in August. So I'll talk about it a lot more there. But there is a story of during one of their postseason runs where Fedorov had sustained broken ribs and was like, okay, I'm done. Like I'm not coming back or whatever. And during intermission, like the rest of the team being like, no, you got to play. And this is earlier on before they get all 5 guys. And Iserman being like, what do you mean you're not playing? Like, no, you're playing. Like, you have to play. Like, what? Like, why are you letting us all down? Why are you doing that? And Fedorov was just like, I can't, whatever. Like, I've got broken ribs. And the doctor even was like, he kind of can't. Like, there's no way of dealing with this. And eventually he does. He gets peer pressured into playing, and the doctor performed for the first time the doctor had ever done it. And he talked about how nervous he was. A very risky procedure to give him pain injections around his ribs, where the threat was him puncturing his lung or it not taking, all that kind of stuff, and the reactions. It was the first time Fedorov was having some of these drugs. If he has an issue and it's right there by his heart and his lungs, that could be significant. And the fact that you're trying to wiggle a needle several points around ribs, all around vital organs and stuff, and how significant all that was, and how that was all determined during the course of one 15-minute intermission. You know what I mean? And how it was just peer pressure from the rest of the team that made Fedorov do this, and the doctor performed this procedure that the doctor admitted he wasn't entirely comfortable performing. You know what I mean? Like, but and I just think of things like that. Tyrod Taylor in the NFL, to use that example, that's literally what happened. Cracked ribs, goes in for the injection, they punctured his lung. Like that, it is a possibility. We've seen it happen. So I just think of stories like that, and again, it's one of those things where it leaves a bad taste in my mouth about something that is otherwise amazing, talking about playoff hockey. So it's a thing, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But let's try not to leave everybody on a downer note, RJ.
I like that idea.
Let's try not to. Do you have something cheery and happy you want to talk about?
Let's see.
Paul
Maurice.
Yeah, I was gonna say, talking about league-wide news, we should mention Paul Maurice hired by the Florida Panthers to be their new head coach. We talked about him when he left Winnipeg. Very good coach, very classy guy, all that kind of stuff. I think it makes sense. I don't think after the playoff run that Florida had that you could keep Burnett. Like, I don't think that was enough to remove the interim tag. You could get into maybe like just how they kind of went about bringing in a new head coach over him. But otherwise, like I'm totally down with them not, continuing with him just because of how bad that postseason run was.
Yes, they were woefully unprepared to kind of defend in the way you need to play playoff hockey. Need to bring a different voice in there. I think Paul Maurice is a very good coach. I know we talked about the coach recycling and all that, but in my more generous definition, he's one of those guys that you can give another shot. But talking about the process, I do think the whole thing was kind of mismanaged by the Panthers. I mean, you let the assistants go first, so you announce that the assistants have all been fired. And then you leave Burnett's status kind of up in the air. Maybe he's coming back, maybe he's not. And you get like this week-long period where everybody's wondering what they're going to do. And then some reports come out that, okay, Burnett might be back, but if so, he's going to have a Travis Green or a Jeff Blashill type coach on the bench with him, which basically bringing in your replacement to go coach with you if anything goes wrong. And as you said to me when we were talking about this earlier, like, when has that ever worked in any situation ever? Yeah. Just bringing in the guy's replacement.
It just doesn't. It never does. It just creates all sorts of bad feelings all the way around. And certainly in any sort of leadership position, like a coach of a team or management at a company or wherever, it's the absolute worst thing to do, because you're basically telling everybody underneath them also, like, guess what? You now have to determine who you should be listening to. Like, do you listen to the person who you should technically be listening to because they have the title? Or do you listen to the person that you all know is going to be replacing that person in a little while? So you don't want to like go against them and piss them off, because really they're going to be there more long term. But if those two have differing opinions about something, you just put everybody beneath them in the worst position possible. And that permeates through a culture very, very quickly, and it never has good results.
Yep. And then when it all goes wrong inevitably and you falter early, you're left with Jeff Blashill to try and go win you the Stanley Cup. So
yeah, exactly.
With all that to boot.
Yeah. So it's never a good situation, that's for sure. Not really anything else league wide, right? Like we're still waiting to see. Now is the time when we'll start to see like the RFAs. We'll start seeing deals for them and stuff. Now that the cup is kind of over, nobody wants to rain on the Stanley Cup parade by being like, hey, we just made like a bunch of signings for depth players or whatever. Nobody wants to draw the attention away from it. So exciting things coming, and then obviously the draft a week from tomorrow. So that's going to be fun. We're going to be doing more of like the draft lowdown stuff, not on the Red Glare podcast because we're saving that for the next episode of the deep dive, where yes, it'll be mostly through a Kraken lens, but we'll be talking about all the prospects, given that the Kraken pick high in the second round, have so many second round picks. So we'll be talking about guys further on down the board than just like, oh, who should they take at 4? And you don't get to hear really about a lot of the prospects that way. So we'll be doing all that in the draft preview. We want to have plenty of viewer questions for that too, so feel free to leave questions either in the comments for this video, because we'll record that soon, or on Twitter. Sent out a tweet, we can send out another one or re-up it.
Yep, I'll re-up it. Yeah,
just to get
kind of a last call
questions.
for questions.
Yeah, just get everybody's questions about the draft. We want to make sure that that's a big thing. And then reminder, we will be live for that first night of the draft. So you can join us for that. It should be a lot of fun. Get to see who the Kraken take, see how the draft shakes out. I mean, is New Jersey trading down, RJ? Is Montreal going to take Slavkovsky? Or is this all just the media coming up with stories? Because otherwise it seemed like everything was predetermined a month ago.
No, the media would never do that. We've spent enough time around them. We know, and I guess we are them now. So we know we would never do something
as
like
the
that.
Title of this Red Glare, where we break down the Stanley Cup final for 45 minutes, becomes Slavkovsky at 1. Bob McKenzie's latest rankings are whack.
You'll never believe who's at number 2.
Yep. So much fun. I'm really looking forward to all that and stuff, and being able to do that live with everybody. It should be a lot of fun. But I think that's going to do it for this episode of the Red Glare podcast. Thanks so much for joining us, everybody. Hope you guys all enjoyed the postseason run. I'm sure. I mean, I know several of our people have been following the Avalanche, and they've been having an amazing time. So very happy for all of you, and hopefully the apology tour was good enough. It was sufficient.
Yep.
I felt so. It was sincere. Our apologies throughout have been sincere. That's all that matters, right?
Yeah, I didn't script it or anything. I just, I went with it.
Yeah. Regretfully, I made several comments about the Colorado Avalanche that a paper tiger is defined as.
Yeah, Webster's Dictionary defines paper tiger as.
It wasn't any of that. It was all good. So congratulations once again to the Colorado Avalanche. Got a busy offseason coming, but it seems like they're taking their sweet time, enjoying it as they should. Winning the cup. Can't wait to see what the parade and everything looks like too. I'm sure that's going to be a lot of fun. So very happy to them. Lightning, they're not going to go away. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on whether or not you root for a team in the Eastern Conference. And it's gonna be a fun off season. And already I'm just like, ugh, how many days till like training camps? Season starts?
I know. Bring it on.
I know. Well, it'll get there soon enough. But until then, we'll see you all next time.